Well, my name is James Yount. I am a recovered meth addict and alcoholic. I grew up in a church, but I don't know if I ever had real faith. And it's been a really interesting walk to get to where I am today. You know, I guess the best place to start would be August 20th of 2020. I'm a 350-pound meth addict who just turned 40 years old. That's August 20th is my birthday. And I'm well aware of how dysfunctional and crumbling my life is. There had been a couple suicide attempts. My life is at the worst point it could possibly be. And I found that when we're grasping at straws, when we're feeling like we're hopeless, and I'm not the only person who I've heard say something along these lines, is that that's probably when we were our closest to feeling God's touch. Or that's why the adage that there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole, right? There is something innate in us that at some point in time in our life that we will call out to God no matter what our belief is. And I believe that is the Holy Spirit that lives in each of us. Um, and so I said something really simple along the lines of like, God, I don't know if you're there. I don't know if you care about me. I don't know if this is even going to help or if it matters, but I need help quitting drugs because I feel like that's a really good place to start. And I remember saying that like that's a good place to start. I can look back on that like 4.5 years later and be like, you think that's obviously a really great place to start. Um, and that's where it started. And then 1 month and 2 days later, robotically, I got high for the last time, flushed all my dope, smashed all my paraphernalia, and instantly regretted it. Instantly regretted. Like, what did I do? What did I do? And in that year, from September 22nd of 2020 to say, oh, probably October of 2021, I really struggled. And the fact that I was so ignorant to God walking alongside me for that first year and a half, like I can think back and I don't understand how I managed to stay sober or how I kept my sanity other than God walked with me. And um, it was really hard because I was searching for this magic bullet solution that was going to fix everything, and there was no fix. And that drove me crazy. And my anxiety was worse than it was on drugs. And um, I said another prayer sometime around October of 21. Again, just like God, I really need something. Like if you're there, I really need something. And that's when I heard Jason Redman's TED Talk for the first time. And I remember listening to it. It's raining. I had borrowed my stepmom's car so I could go see my son play football. And all of a sudden this TED Talk came on. Like I felt like, what am I complaining about? Like this human being's been literally shot, and I'm like, this is so far out of the realm of my reality or what I'm dealing with. And he used words like tenacity and persistence. I'm like, wow, I can do this. Like if this human being can sit here and say, I can rebuild my life after suffering this, like I can rebuild my life too. And it doesn't have to be, you know, this whole chaotic thing. And so that's when I really started focusing in. I'm like, okay, I started looking at like, where am I at? Okay. I'm 330 pounds at this point, like 327 pounds at this point. Like I hadn't worked in 5 years. And I'm like, okay, I've got to figure something out. Like the first thing I need to do is lose weight. And in losing weight, I was able to get back to work. And so as I'm healing, I'm like, okay, I'm listening to these people, and the people are talking about, you have your mental, spiritual, and physical health, and they are all intertwined with one another. And I was really all for the mental health because I knew that was, something I share very regularly is like, especially for people who are addicts and they ask me like, how do you get sober? I'm like, well, you got to heal your why, and your why is unique to each and every individual. So, but if you're not willing to touch that why or go to that why, then it's going to be hard to be sober. So I was working on my mental health, and obviously I really needed to work on my physical health because it was so bad, but I was afraid of the spiritual health. And so early April, late March of 2022, I went up and saw Sam, our mutual friend of Pamela's of mine, and we went to a bookstore. And Sam is kind of gently nudging me into this concept of Christianity, but I'm still, even though what I know now and what I can see is God walking with me through the fires, if you will, I was still hesitant because I was still holding on to some anger that wouldn't let me see the truth. But anyway, so I'm opening myself up to this concept of that, like, you need spiritual health. There has to be something greater than you that you believe in. And so I'm in a bookstore with Sam, and he buys me a book, and he scoffs at it because it's called Rebel Buddha. And start reading this book. If it did anything for me, it taught me how to slow down and breathe and be still because I struggle greatly with sitting still. And so I'm processing this book, and probably about a month into this book, I live out in the middle of nowhere in the country, and there is a pond in my front yard. Well, just off the driveway, there's a big pond, and there's some big boulders that overlook the pond, like right outside my door. And I still sit out there and pray, weather permitting, as often as possible. And um, there's a tree on the far, well, there was a tree on the far side of the pond that was being choked out by ivy. And it was an old fir tree and had these big branches that would poke out, but this vibrant, bright green ivy. And so I would sit there and I would paint that in my mind's eye. And I would sit there and start painting in brushstrokes of color and yada, 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 just to try to reflect and breathe and, start my morning. And one day I'm out there going through this process, and all of a sudden everything goes black and gray. And this hand comes down out of the sky. This sounds crazy every time I tell this story. Um, this hand comes down out of the sky holding a pencil. And something that was always been very profound to me in this is that in the depths of my addiction, I drew a lot in black and gray with pencil and paper. And so all of a sudden, this hand comes down, and on the surface of the pond, um, my mind's eye starts drawing what I perceive as Jesus's face on the water. And I was like, well, it was one of the most bizarre things that's ever happened to me in my life. And I had to double check to make sure I was sober. But I was like, that was really weird. Like, why did my mind just paint Jesus on the surface of the water? And I'm sitting there processing that over a couple of days, and I don't really know how to tell anybody that this has happened. And then, uh, within 3 or 4 days of that happening, my son comes to me and goes, "Hey, Dad, I think I found my faith, and I'd like to go to church." Well, I can be dense and I can be slow to grasp things, but I was like, okay, I'm not going to question this anymore. I'm hearing you loud and clear at this point. And so my son and I went to church Mother's Day weekend of 2022, and I've been going ever since. And 2 or 3 weeks into it, I resubmitted my life to Jesus Christ. And my life has never been the same since. I don't even know how to put into words how profoundly my life has changed in the last 2.5 to 3 years. I mean, my life has changed a lot in the last five. I mean, in ways that I could sit and talk for an hour, but I've often said that I've never had less, but I've never had more. Like I have a wonderful fiance. I have a wonderful relationship with my kids. I have joy that I looked for and peace that I looked for in the flesh and in drugs and in running and in hiding, um, that I spent decades trying to find, um, in everything but the truth. And that truth being the way and the light, which is Jesus Christ. And, you know, I've had people tell me, oh, of course you believe in Jesus. Of course you're a Christian. Let's look at where you've come from. Of course you need this. And I'm like, I I don't think that has anything to do with it. It's almost a slap in the face because I could have made any other choice. In fact, I was trying to make other choices. I didn't, people like, oh, you got programmed in 12-step recovery. Like, no, never really done 12-step recovery. Not since I've maintained sobriety. I tried early on in my 20s, right before my son was born, and it didn't happen. I wasn't indoctrinated. I wasn't, um, you know, the truth just hit me. And there is a peace in my heart, even when the chaos of life still happens. It assures me that it's going to be okay. And that's kind of where I'm at today. There's a lot that I could add, I suppose, but that's the TLDR.
Thank you for sharing, James. Your story is so powerful. For the audience, why don't you give us the top three gratitudes you have for the changes that have taken place in your life over the last few years?
My top three gratitudes. Oh, man. Number one is not taking any day for granted. Um, I think when you have lived, even if you didn't live the life that I've lived, I think when you start breaking over, say, 35 or 40, you've lived quite a number of days. And many of those days, no matter what, I think we find ourselves, and we're probably all been going through the motions, like get up, go to work, do this, and it's just robotic in a sense, or programmable, like yep, yep, and we don't stop and appreciate the mundane. We don't stop and we don't appreciate the joy of waking up. We don't appreciate the joy of a sunrise. We don't appreciate the beauty of the sunset because we've seen so many of them and we've experienced so many of them. I think that's my first big gratitude is that I tend to be much more present and aware of the beauty of and joy that each day brings. Um, my second biggest gratitude would get is getting to be the father that I always wanted in my life and the father I always dreamed of being, to my two children. I love being my kids' dad and being present in their life and, being someone that they can trust and depend means the world to me. Um, and in that same breath, so like to be, um, being Uncle Stinky to my two little nieces. Um, Obviously in the depths of my addiction, I didn't get to know them when they were little. I wasn't invited to the hospital. I wasn't invited to the first couple of birthdays. Um, and I wouldn't have gone even if I was. So, but just getting to be in their lives, um, and go do fun things with them, and be invited into their hearts as somebody they can love and trust means a lot. And I think the third biggest gratitude, and maybe the one that puts it all wrapped up in a neat little bow, is, um, being able to be the gratitude of God's grace. Because it is the grace of God that saved me. It is the grace of God that brought me hope. It is the grace of God that I am still here to be able to appreciate the other two things and all the other great things that have come in the last 5 years of my life, doing things differently. You know, I often tell people like, well, how do you do, how this or that? I'm just like, you know, God will present us the tools of change. I've just never been afraid to pick up the shovel or jump off the diving board or whatever has been required of me, metaphorically speaking, to to do that because I know what choosing my old habits would have done. I know what being inactive, I know what choosing things of this world get me, and I know where I get on my own accord, and it's usually not good. And so I am, yeah, just really grateful for the grace of God because without that, none of the rest of the stuff would be possible.
So good. So, for anyone out there listening that might be in the position you were in back in 2020, maybe they don't see a way out of their situation or are trying to find hope or a reason to go on, what would you say to them?
That's a difficult question. I think the thing is when we are when you're that low and when you're that dark and when you feel like your life is without hope, um, the concept of God can be very, very overwhelming. And so I think everyone needs to find that at their own pace. But like kind of what I said when it's just you and I talking earlier is that like life is never going to be without issue. Life is never going to not have struggle and strife, but it's always going to be okay. And learning to trust that like take a like trust the baby step. Trust the baby step forward because going into the unknown is scary and it's frightening, but it sure as heck beats staying stuck in the mire of self-inflicted gunshot wounds or addiction or abusive relationships or toxic relationships, like stepping away from the comfort of discomfort is the bravest thing you can ever do. And it's okay to ask for help. I think it's you just have to trust that it's going to get better. And it's really hard because it's really difficult to tell somebody, oh, like I don't know, for myself, like when somebody's like, oh, you have this or you have that, and God loves you. And, when you feel kicked or you feel beaten down and you're full of self-pity and you're full of the victim mentality, it's really hard to rationalize all that. I think the best thing that you can do when you're that low is just take a chance to do something different and see where that gets you. But not just one day, like a whole lot of days in a row, because we have to create new habits, and new habits take time to reprogram our brain.
Thank you again for sharing your story today, James. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners before we wrap up today?
Something I've really been focused on and where my writings have taken me and in this part of my walk of faith is that back to that same question and to tie it all together is that I feel that I have to make action today to lead to a better tomorrow, but I can't manufacture anything between where I'm at today and where I'm at tomorrow. And in that space, I have to trust God. That's where in the gaps between wherever God's taking me and wherever I'm at today, I have to trust that space in the gap by being present, by being in daily prayer, by reading in the word daily, and just putting my faith to practice, not being stagnant, by any means, but um, just not manufacturing rungs on the monkey bars. Going, heading, and swinging, and in that space between one monkey bar to the next, fully trusting that God is going to be there and comfort me and get me through whatever happens in the gap.
Thank you again for being here today and sharing your heart with us, James. I so appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, Pamela.